Thanks, Jeff, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I know you've been a very busy guy leading up to the SP Summit.
Yeah.
And it was really exciting to see everything that you kind of had announced as part of that announcement, also at Build as well with the on-demand stuff. Mm-hmm. I guess to kind of step back a bit, the journey that we've been on with SharePoint 2 years ago, like there was a lot of people questioning, is SharePoint dead? The SharePoint site tile disappeared and became sites on the app launch, which caused huge controversy. And then you came back in role after having a different role inside of Microsoft. And suddenly the tables turned. And last year's virtual summit and the Ignite session really kind of was like you guys saying, no, we're back. This is not going away. We're not dead. And then I think with this year's virtual summit, it was really about, okay, and this is what we're really getting at now. Now we've kind of overcome some of the the hurdles with the OneDrive sync as one example, and the amazing now user interface that we've got. One of the questions I had, and it actually came up in the Facebook thread that we had, was what innovations do you see were the most prominent in the SP Summit announcements, based on the fact that a lot of the other some of the features were kind of there already, but had a new beautiful UI. Like, what things do you feel are kind of a different approach to what SharePoint used to do from a functionality perspective? Yeah,
as you're pointing out, we went back to our core, if you will, on the scenarios that we've always been known for, and tried to do them better, more cross-platform, more open source tech, with a new level of usability. So I sort of look at them and say, 2 years ago, we made people the promise that OneDrive was going to give you anywhere access to your files. We did that with sync and mobile apps, and so the things we showed at the SP Summit about files on demand and the new sharing UX are taking that to the next level. Those will probably be the things of anything we do that more people will touch more every day than seeing their files in the shell and sharing them more easily. So that's a big one. SharePoint's always been about team collab, and we've had a lot. If anything, sometimes you have too little innovation, and sometimes we have too much. And so we had a lot of collab thingies going on, and I really feel great about the last couple of years, how our team and a lot of my peers' teams have sort of worked to bring this together, where groups is an underlying plumbing. You can talk about stuff in mail, chat, and social, and then SharePoint's sort of the content management system below those. And so the things we talked about at the summit about deeper connections with groups. So again, it works with all three things, but in particular, the integration with Teams will be great. Power Apps and Flow, a lot of people like that. As you probably know, when I came back to the team, there was a lot of questions about where we're going with workflow and InfoPath, SharePoint Designer, and we really wanted to pick something that had that embedded application feel that SharePoint has, because we're not trying to be just a toolkit, but something that connected to the rest of Microsoft, if not the rest of the world. And so I spent a lot of time with the Power Apps and Flow team before they launched, working on that strategy, and it was really cool to see sort of what we shipped last year and now this year, with Power Apps really moving just from an app environment to delivering embedded forms, from flows being something you can use to connect things, to them powering sort of out-of-box approvals and feedback. So that's pretty cool. The personalized search work we did, I think nobody else in the industry does what we do, where we're using social and collaborative signals to rank documents, not just the content of the documents. And we've had that for a couple years with the Office Graph and Delve, but the thing we're doing now is sort of taking that to the next level with core search, because if an engineer and a marketing guy both search on the same term in a company, they should probably see different documents. Right. Some new developer stuff, SharePoint Framework, you're familiar with that, the extensions we did, new management stuff, new UI coming. But the big thing, and the thing that I was most excited about, and the thing we started ramping the design team up 18 to 24 months ago, was the work around communication sites. That if you look at what we've done over the last 18 months, new JavaScript framework, new page model, new web parts. It was all sort of building to a new mobile app and news distribution. It was all building to what we showed at the summit on the communication site. So I'm pretty stoked about that and the feedback on that, and I can't wait. The first release deployment of it should be in June, and I can't wait for people to try it out. So those are the big things. There's a lot of detail below that, but it was a good old-fashioned, well-rounded SharePoint announcement with stuff for users, stuff for developers, stuff for IT, stuff for collab world, stuff for publishing world. So I feel like it was, sort of a classic SharePoint
And I think
event.
the way that you did it with the keynote, and then you had all the subsequent Microsoft Mechanics videos, allow people to drive deeper, was a really good way of kind of allowing people to go and cherry pick bits that they were interested in based on, what projects they had at hand.
Yeah, because as you know, we've got people in the ecosystem who, they want to lead with the platform stuff, and so it's, tell me what new thing you did on the platform, and then there's other people say, if you put platform stuff in the keynote, I'm going to turn away. Show me what you're doing for my end users. I'm buying you as an app. And so it was a way for us to address.
Kind of juggle both.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, you look at the views of those YouTube videos, and the numbers grew really quickly straight after that keynote. Very much like how they used to when you had the SharePoint conferences of old, where you had like 200 and something sessions that would pump out. I guess the difference being, and it's something I guess you're familiar with being in it for so long now, is it used to be a 3-year cycle where you'd have this huge big bang to, I guess now there's like a 6-month steady cadence between your Ignite conference and the virtual summits that you've done to kind of hold features to do the development moments.
Yeah, the last 2 years we've done, in the fall, I write a document and work with the GPMs to make a deck of what we want to do in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
We get the team together, we fire them up, and we really do have a plan.
Yeah.
Including mock concept cars and so forth. And so that day is about 6 months away prior to the May event. Now we ship things along the way as they're ready. As you know, just to pick one thing that was awesome, this year we did a bunch of work on file viewers, so we now have 275 file viewers. There was no reason to hold that for the SharePoint Summit. We shipped it out there. Mm-hmm. And then the May event, we heard from customers that, they want time to value, so when we're ready to ship stuff, go ahead and ship it. But they sort of want to hear the big picture as opposed to have it all dribble out. And they want some heads up. And so what we did last year was pick the May timeframe as a place where we could tell the whole news story, give people a heads up a few months before Ignite, and then start shipping stuff over the summer, and they'd see it in first release. And there were places, I think we did it pretty well, and then there were places we could have given people a little more heads up. Yeah. And so, I kind of like that model, and so we did it a second year in a row, and we'll see what we do later this year.
One of the questions Reuven Gotts had, who's been an MVP for a long time in this space, was around, he works traditionally with the larger customers, the bigger enterprises, and he was really interested in the decision point between having features on by default when they deploy through the rings, so first release and then into production across all tenants, and this notion of giving customers the ability to turn those or decide when they're enabled.
Yeah.
How do you tackle that challenge? Like maybe when you go talk to these customers yourself, like how do you do that juggle? Because it is definitely a tension point, I think, in the larger customers that want to kind of control when these things are available to their users. Yeah,
it is definitely a balancing act. We hear both sets of feedback. We hear, I want stuff off by default, and I want to be able to opt in because I need to understand it and get it to my users and so forth. And then we hear from a lot of users and business decision makers, don't have the IT people be a bottleneck. This is the cloud era. I can handle this stuff.
Yeah.
We've talked to many companies where tons of employees are frustrated that IT, not because they're malicious, with good reasons, good intentions, sort of wants to control it. And so what we've done and how we've balanced those is we sort of looked at the feature, and if we think it's needs some education, we'll put it in first release for a while so people have a heads up. And then if we think it's disruptive, we will, we'll give people the switch. And example of sort of the new user interface for SharePoint last year, we algorithmically detected if we could safely convert your site to the new UI.
Right.
And then we went ahead and did it. And in first release, we learned all the reasons why people for customization branding wouldn't want to do that. And if we detected any of those, we sort of were off by default and let people switch in. And we told people, we think the day will come when this will be on by default, but not now. Not surprisingly, there were some people who we had turned it off on, went and turned it on to the new UI, and there are some people who said, I don't want to train my user on the change. And sometimes we look at that and say, I don't think that the new UI is that complicated compared to what most users encounter in the consumer world, but we'll give you that choice because it was sort of a one-time big bang switch in the model.
Yeah.
But generally, we want it to not be that disruptive. So we're going to ship a lot of stuff where we won't have a classic mode, where there won't be a way to turn it off. And if that's a dumb call and we get a boatload of feedback on it, we'll obviously address it.
Right. Well, you need to kind of put the goodies in the new stuff and not kind of, so it tempts people over as opposed to kind of keep fulfilling that classic stuff.
But explicitly, our goal is to not have things behind an on-off switch.
Right.
As much as we might get the feedback that everything or most things should be behind an on-off switch, I think we're only going to do that when we think we've done something that's a fairly disruptive change, and we'll get feedback on it. And at the end of the day, we've got to balance all the constituencies of the product.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I came across one yesterday. I'm doing a demonstration and a webinar tomorrow with a partner, and I created a new team site which had a group underlying, and I created a few, but I wanted to clean up because it was in my production environment. And the delete wasn't in the site settings, but your guys were brilliant. They jumped on straight away.
Yeah.
Dan Holm was teasing me a bit, and then Tejas Mehta actually replied, going, no, we're getting to that. So I think there's that journey that you're on in terms of the groups underneath and the benefits that gives you, which is, the calendaring and the task management in SharePoint. You kind of have really started to focus on what you deliver in SharePoint and let some other services in Office 365 be that best of breed, which I think is good for SharePoint in the long run for sure. And I think the webinar I'm doing, coming up with Joel Olsen actually, is around, you've come from this SharePoint world where it kind of did everything for you to moving into Office 365, where now there's lots of other services that play point there. And it kind of fascinated me a bit with the Business Insider article you recently did, where you talked about SharePoint Online being, the second most used service in Office 365. Do you ever get to the point, and maybe this is a contentious thing to ask, but do you ever feel like that might become the most used service in Office 365 from a file-centric view of the world being more popular than an email-centric view of the world?
Yeah, we've certainly, the strategy we've taken of SharePoint being the content management system that connects to every mode of conversations would lend one to believe that it's partly good product design and partly, if everybody lives in a chat room, if they're working on documents. I think we'll get close. I don't think we'll get all the way there for a couple reasons. One is just a huge percentage of a large number of our Office 365 customers have sort of frontline employees that may not work on documents. So these may be people who are waiters and waitresses who may check their email in a retail environment, or even sort of airline pilots. Delta Airlines, a big portal online in SharePoint. I imagine some of the pilots, occasionally work on Office documents, but probably not that much. But they've got to check their email. So I think there's a lot of roles where they may use SharePoint as a portal, but they're not really working on Office documents. And so I think that last little bit will keep it from totally being number one in terms of sort of intensity of usage, daily usage. Do I think every company will build a portal on SharePoint that every employee will go to at least once a month? I hope so. And then in which case, then we should be 100%. The other thing is there's some small number of companies and users who are licensed for email and nothing else.
Right.
But again, we're trying to change that. So I think we'll get close, but I think there are a lot of people out there who are less information workers than task workers.
And I think it's definitely a lot closer now with the modern pages. When I was a consultant in Australia, God, if I'd had $1 for every time someone said, "Can I pay you to make this not look like SharePoint?" Whereas I'm pretty sure now with people moving the way they're going, especially with the multi-column support that you showed in communication sites, that'll go away. People will get used to skinning it the way they do with the out-of-the-box approaches, rather than kind of days of old where you'd be removing HTML out of the ASPX master pages.
Yeah. Well, when going back to the comment you made about the tile, I made the call that there were sort of two things. One is we had to figure out in the information of architecture of Office 365, were we going to be in the camp of files, calendar, tasks, or were we going to be in the camp of Outlook, SharePoint, Teams, etc.? Were we going to use Word, Excel? Were we going to use brands or generics? And we were sort of one leg in, one leg out, and we are going to go with the brands, and we still have some work to do to finish that up. But so that was one thing. But the big thing is I said, no, we're going to make people 2 years from now say, I want a SharePoint site because SharePoint looks great. It works on the phone. And there were people who said no, SharePoint's something you have to reskin. And I said, no, we're going to dramatically ramp the design team. We're going to build a new JavaScript framework that's faster than anything anybody could do. We're going to build a mobile app, and and so part of it's the multi-column thing, but then you see some of these other things that in terms of full bleed visuals, parallax scrolling. You have some other stuff coming that
even like the web part properties, being able to modify them without a full page refresh. For someone who's used SharePoint for a long time, you're like, finally,
I'm sure you've done it. Go look at Andy's video, the mechanics video, and slow it down to half speed and watch him as he goes.
Yeah.
And there's more coming than even what he showed.
So you mentioned Teams as well, and I've blogged a bit about the confusion that seems to be out there a bit on. There's now kind of Outlook groups and SharePoint and Teams and Yammer as kind of, I would say you could pivot in and have conversations in each of those four. And the feedback we're getting from customers is that they'll likely have a primary in, and then they'll have maybe another one they'll pick as another communication channel, whatever fits that particular org. At the virtual summit, you announced that the SharePoint pages would properly be supported as a tab. Before, the Chrome was missing a bit, so that when you're in your edit view, the list item, it kind of broke a little bit. But now that works, which is great. How do you juggle that notion of kind of, I could go create a team right now and have that kind of conversation view as my primary, but then have a tab, which is like where I do my portal type approach to that. What's your kind of, how are you guiding that? How are you working with teams to balance the entry points?
Yeah, I think it's, just to sort of step back, and we use some terms in inconsistent ways, and part of what we tried to do 2 years ago, and then, not 2 years ago, a year ago, and then what I really tried to do slowly and carefully after practicing it like 5 SharePoint Saturdays is sort of, groups is the security model at the bottom.
Yeah.
That's how you secure things in Office 365. It's not a separate destination. I know there was a mobile app called Groups, but there's not going to be anymore. So Groups is a security thing. Above that, you have SharePoint is the content management thing for docs, lists, and pages. And then you have 3 conversation modalities between Outlook and chat and with Teams and Yammer. And Teams has gone with a model that says, hey, we're not just a conversation modality, we can be the container for other stuff. And we said, cool, that's your vision, great. So we'll play in that world. There will be a set of people who will say, I'm going to live in a combination of the browser and an Outlook. That's sort of how most teams work with SharePoint today, is some mix of the desktop apps, the browser, and Outlook. And then there'll be some who say, no, I'm going to buy into the full team shell, and I don't want to bounce out to the browser to see SharePoint pages. I want to do it in the context of that shell and tab between conversations and content. And we said, great. And so we worked with the team, and actually for quite a while before Teams got launched, and I think came up with a pretty good plan. And people want a simple answer, and do I say, on this day, the web browser and email will be dead, and everything will be in a chat room? That seems kind of crazy and extreme. There will be some people in some work groups who say, yeah, I really love that. And there'll be others who say, well, I bought it in the chat thing, but I still like the web and want to go out to the browser.
Engineers, they live in Slack right now. They're not in email at all. They have zero in their inbox.
Yeah.
And I think it's just whatever modality you're used to and the way that you're working with the rest of your team.
And Teams has sort of done a bold leapfrog above Slack with threaded conversations and the integration with tabs. And
we're desperately waiting for 2 connectors, and then we'll port over. But it's a really good product, and it's nice to see, after working at Microsoft, to see the integrations between all these teams that are in different buildings here on campus, working so well together. And even I was really surprised about the SP Summit with the Yammer integration being that deep as well into those pages.
So that's the thing, is if I could wave a wand and have every blog that's written SharePoint versus groups versus Yammer, blah, 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 I'd like to say, no, groups is the security thing, SharePoint's the content management thing, and however you want to talk, mail, social, or chat, SharePoint's there
still going to be consumed from a SharePoint perspective.
If you want to go the extra mile in the Teams UI and live within a tab in their shell as opposed to bring up a browser, that's cool with us. And we're working pretty closely with the Teams group, so that's an option. But that doesn't mean we have to say, okay, in order to make this really, really simple, the web and email are going to die, and there's only going to be one choice, which is so that seems kind of crazy. And so we have multiple choices. And as you said, I think people are starting to get that something like Teams or Slack works very well in a small, high-velocity work group. But if you've got some big, giant community, with thousands of people, it's something like Yammer is a better fit. And we've posted on this that inside our small work groups, we use Teams ourselves to build this stuff. But when we go talk to thousands of people in the Microsoft Salesforce, they're not stumbling all over each other in a chat room. We go into Yammer, because then people can, it's a different enough paradigm that's tuned for that. And again, SharePoint's connected to all of them, so we will have the union of their usage. Yes, that's the plan.
And then the other big thing from our side was this is awesome, was when you talked about the people search and this kind of real dependency on the profile information. And obviously, us at Hyperfish, our main goal is to help organizations complete their profiles. And what we're seeing is most organizations don't have those profiles, and I joke with some of our customers that there's only 2 organizations in the world that have profiles complete, and it's Microsoft and Contoso. And so what do you see as you mentioned the scenario earlier on about marketing and engineering and getting different people search results. How do you see customers driving that? Is there going to be much configuration in that search to tailor those decisions, or is it all really around machine learning and kind of black boxed from that search results?
We've had sort of the spectrum of out of the box and algorithmic to highly customizable, and people do want to customize, as you're in the business, and you felt passionate enough about this space that you said, let me leave Microsoft and go work on this. And so I think for sure there will be a set of companies where managing their user profiles and schemas around those will be incredibly important to them. And I think we've been a little more focused in the last couple years, and I'll defend it, it's a trade-off, on let's get the out-of-the-box great. Let's really, and the guys in the fast Delve team who do that. But if you look at what we've done, is we've built a people experience that we're plumbing across Office 365
Yeah.
that shows up in OneDrive and SharePoint, but Outlook.
Right, they just announced that yesterday in the notifications emails, which is great.
Yeah, and so there is definitely a master plan there of having a people page, people card that transcends all of Office 365. It's not just limited to SharePoint, and that the profile is pretty rich, and they'll eventually have customization. The other thing that we didn't announce, but because of the acquisition of LinkedIn, at some point you'll see more connections there, because clearly you should, if you want to look at somebody's background,
right.
even if you work at the same company, LinkedIn's a great resource, and so we're working on that. But again, there will be a set of companies who will say to us, I want to build on this as a platform. I'm a consulting firm. I need somebody in Germany next week who knows the banking industry, and they'll want to build an app on that, and we'll have to have the guidelines with the Graph API and the people profile. And as always in SharePoint, there will be a point where you can customize us, and then there's a point where, wow, you're really building a completely different app than what we've given you, and that's okay. Peace. You should just use this as a data source and a search engine, and that's fine. We won't always have our UI be infinitely flexible, and at some point you sort of want the control where you're building your own UI. And so.
Well, it's awesome. Look, I know you've got a hard stop at noon, so a big thank you for coming on the show, Jeff.
Glad to do it.
And congratulations again for a great launch.
Thank you.
And I sit there waiting in excitement to kind of play with the communication sites and a bunch of the other stuff that's going to be rolling out.
Yeah, we look forward to your feedback, everybody's feedback. We have, certainly we're proud of the work, but we have a lot to learn.
Yeah,
so.
your team is doing a really, really good job of kind of interacting with everyone, and the Q&A was excellent. So if you haven't watched all of the YouTube videos, if you're listening,
take a week off work, sit on the couch. Right. It's really good stuff.
That's the beauty of all these TVs now with YouTube channels. You can just subscribe to Microsoft Mechanics and leave them rolling and wait for your wife to yell at you or your husband to yell at you to stop working.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Great.
Well, thanks very much, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thanks.